Dag sê en hartlik welkom by Reguit met Robinson hier op Litnet. 'n Ewige stryd heers tussen die Trump-administrasie van die VSA en die voorste universiteit in die wêreld, Harvard in Massachusetts in Amerika. President Trump het sy veldtog teen immigrante en buitelanders uitgebrei na die universiteite. Harvard is veral geteken. Die universiteit is gesog wêreldwyd en het tans sowat 7000 ingeskrewe buitelandse studente. Dit is 'n peperduur universiteit veral vir Amerikaanse burgers. Staatstoelaas van sowat $3 miljard word aan die universiteit bewillig. Die regering het besluit om alle federale befondsing te staak, maar die hof het uitspraak gelewer dat dit tydelik opgehef moet word. So daar's nog 'n groot stryd wat voorlê. Ons gas is professor Denise Zinn van die Nelson Mandela Universiteit, maar sy het ook bande met Harvard. Welcome, Doctor. Nice speaking to you, Professor, this morning. What is so special about Harvard?
Thank you so much en baie dankie dat ek in Engels kan praat. My Afrikaans is nie so goed nie. So baie dankie vir dit en vir die onderhoud. Ja, so Harvard is a very special place because of course, obviously it's standing, as you said in its introduction. It's the oldest university in the country, in the United States, the first one and the oldest, over three centuries old. But mostly it's about its quality of its academic offerings, its thought leadership, the fact that it has an absolutely stellar international student body from whom we learn from each other. And so really it's a very special place to be at.
Just give us perspective on how old it is really, because it's quite extraordinary actually.
Yes, so you know that it was started in 1636, and it was actually started in order to train clergy who were coming from the countries from which people were immigrating, mostly England, the UK, Europe. And it felt it needed to have a clergy that could help guide the new settlers into the United States. So 1636, before, as you, I think, pointed out to me once, Freek, that it was before Jan van Riebeeck actually came to the Cape. So that's how old it is, almost older than South Africa before it was colonized, or when it was colonized, put it that way. Mm.
Are you still involved at Harvard?
I am only marginally involved. As an alumnus of the institution, I get annual invitations to all kinds of events. Invitations I'm not able to take up because of the expense of going there. I was there as a scholarship student. I would never have been able to afford going there. And of course, I keep in contact with some of my old professors. As well as with some of the people who were in my class. I did my master's degree there and my doctoral degree there. So
Now,
that's the extent of my involvement.
are there South African students at Harvard at the moment?
There are actually a few undergraduate students. They are self-sponsored. Harvard's scholarships have primarily been to postgraduate students, and it's a very interesting phenomenon, a kind of funding, because it actually came from the scholarship I was on, for example, and several others, came from the disinvestment in South Africa in the 1980s. And this was actually as a result of protest by staff and students against apartheid and apartheid's policies, and some of the investments that were still therefore linked to that regime. And those disinvested funds are what made up the scholarship that enabled people like myself and many, many others to go and study at Harvard. So it's an interesting irony that disinvestments actually help to fund students like myself being able to study there. So that scholarship still exists because it was then became a trust, and there are still students studying in many of the what they would call the postgraduate schools, like in business, for example, in law. I was in education, in health, and so on. So several people are actually still there as postgraduate students and funded by that kind of scholarship.
Is any state money getting to you at that university or to other students?
Well, what they had besides this postgraduate scholarship, what they just called a Harvard South Africa scholarship, I was awarded a doctoral scholarship when I moved from a master's scholarship, which was funded by that Harvard South African fellowship. I was then funded by a doctoral fellowship. Now, where those funds actually came from, I don't know, but I do know that Harvard has several sources of funding besides some of the state funding, which we have seen in the news, have been halted. Some of those grants have been taken away to the tune of millions, multiple millions of rands, I mean, of dollars. They also have endowments. And so where exactly the funds came from, I'm not sure. But I was endowed by a Harvard scholarship and not just a Harvard South African scholarship.
What was the atmosphere at Harvard when you were there?
Yeah, so everything is influenced by context, Freek. So for me, I was there in the 90s, and that was under the Clinton administration, which was quite a liberal administration. And so I experienced the atmosphere there as exceptionally warm and welcoming, and very inclusive and also very diverse. I think Harvard had a policy then, and I think still has a policy of admitting um, about between 30 and 35% of its students as international students. The value of that was seen as being able to um, have world views and conversations integrated into the discussions and the debates and the knowledge that was actually being pursued at that institution. And so it was exceptionally um, inclusive and welcoming of international students. So I experienced the atmosphere there as actually quite liberating, to be very honest, in many different ways. Freek, I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that, but I found it quite a liberating environment.
Yeah, well, describe that. Why do you say so?
Well, let me give you just one example, of how they would embrace students who were coming, especially from countries where the situation was really quite fraught and quite different from perhaps what was happening elsewhere in the world. Um, we had one professor, a Professor Charles Willie was his name, who actually made us feel like we were making a contribution to Harvard University. And he would say to us, don't only express gratitude for being here. We are extremely grateful to you for being here because it gives us insights into the kinds of situations that you are living with in your own countries. And another liberating thing for me was the ability to speak my mind, to be able to speak openly and honestly without any fear of of being repressed and suppressed. But of course, it was also the 90s. So South Africa was going through changes as well. But we had learned during my lifetime to not speak openly because of the fear of being of what that could cause. So that was liberating, and we also found that we could have those kinds of discussions in ways that were very open and liberating. Invited speakers from all around the world, but from our classmates as well, students who came from Cambodia, from China, from Colombia, from Russia, from places around the world, could speak quite openly about some of their struggles. And as a result of that, I think I realized, perhaps for the first time, that ours was not the only struggle in the world. And how do we learn from the conditions of life of peoples all around the world? And that also was liberating. So, yeah, so in many different ways, very eye-opening. and very open to multiple ideas by leading thought leaders from across the world.
Where do most of them come from?
Again, from all over the world. In fact, if one looks at some of the awards that the United States has won, Nobel Prizes, and so on, many of those people are actually people who have come from around the world. They're not necessarily people who are born and bred United States citizens, or if they are people who come from immigrant families. It's an interesting thing to actually look at. But the people in my classes, as I say, at least 30% of them were from other places around the world, from Puerto Rico, from Mexico, from China, from Cambodia, from the USSR, from so many different languages, from Germany, from South America, literally from Australia, from countries all around the world. And people spoke up in those classes. Some culturally were less open to speaking up, but they learned that it was both expected and acceptable to do so in our class discussions.
Get the impression that some students are more forthright in putting their views that are different from the Western values that you cherish, for instance.
Yes, I did find that students, after being there for a while, and especially I was in the postgraduate program, so there were more mature students. I did find them very willing to share their views and to contest their views. I was on the Harvard Educational Review, which is an academic journal, and on that review, on that board, there were students who spoke up. There were doctoral students. We were all doctoral students on the board. We edited the journal. And so the contestations were amazing. Lots of contestation, lots of debate. Um, but that is what was expected of a higher education institution. That debate was the order of the day, that you come there in order to exercise your critical faculties. And that was part of the whole freedom of speech criteria, actually, that you come there, you come to justify your views, to put your views, to argue them, and then to learn from others if you found their arguments more convincing. So I did find that that was definitely part of the ethos of the place.
The Trump administration is arguing that the many foreign students, in particular those from China, are influencing and infiltrating Harvard universities and others with their values, eroding the Western values of the universities as they are today.
I would contest that in the ethos of Harvard, because I think, again, the majority of students, 70% of the students are Harvard students. I mean, not Harvard, are American students. So the likelihood of and the experience of 30% of the students being able to influence that 70% is actually just not logical. Besides that, the culture of the West, and especially of the USA, is one where students are taught from a very young age to be extremely outspoken, to hold their views. In fact, it's an extrovert culture. And students who come from the East, from the Orient, from especially places like China and Japan and so on, are the opposite. The culture is the opposite. The culture is not strident. It is more, um, um, what would I call it? More measured. You don't speak over other people. You don't try to convince other people of your point of view. When you are often mostly invited into the conversation, which Americans actually do very well. They invite you into the conversation, but never to the extent that they will allow you to dominate. So it's actually anti-cultural to say that that would be happening at a place like Harvard and other American institutions.
Do you personally feel that the situation today, what is happening at universities and in particular at Harvard, that this situation is negative and detrimental to democracy as such?
Um, well, look, that's the way you have expressed it. I would say that within any university, anywhere in the world, that the very nature of a university as a scholarly place, um, as a place where teaching, learning, research, engagement happens, that it has to be the kind of place where open debate and where freedom of speech is fundamental to its being able to do its work. And therefore, I would say any government that tries to impose on it a way of engaging that shuts down freedom of speech, that shuts down students' right to protest, for example, like for us in South Africa, post 1990, suddenly, students have found that they could be on platforms and actually voice their views and actually say what it is they thought was wrong with the world, with South Africa, even though we had entered into a phase that was post apartheid. Um, so, to find that in leading institutions anywhere in the world, and especially age old institutions like Harvard, that the idea that students raising their voices to express their views, staff expressing their views, that could be shut down and seen as harmful to that country is something that is actually in severe contradiction with the tenets and the ethos of any university anywhere in the world. I would say anywhere in the world, no matter where that happened, where that happens. So, yes, I would agree with the statement you have made, Friek, that it can actually be seen as something that counters the the criteria for democratic thought and ways of being.
Funding has always been a problem at universities abroad and, of course, here.
Yes.
It seems that the government, the Trump administration, is using funding as a means of influencing the general value standards at that university, in particular Harvard.
I'm sorry. So, what is your question about that? I missed the first part. I'm sorry.
The funding has always been a problem for universities here and
Yes.
elsewhere.
Yes.
But the
Yeah.
accusation now is that the government, the Trump administration, is using funding as a means of influencing the atmosphere and the values of universities, in particular, of course, Harvard.
Yes, absolutely. It's a very dangerous thing, I think, for any institution that is actually promoting research and promoting free speech and promoting freedom of thought and actually expecting of people to be innovative in their thinking, to challenge old ways of doing, because that's how societies make progress. So it's a very, very dangerous thing for any administration to think that its particular era, period of administration can influence something that is a global, age-old scholarly tradition, that it can influence it to the point of imposing its will, which is temporary and which is there for only a very short space of time. It can do damage to the extent of actually setting back progress for decades and maybe even centuries, depending on how long the impact of that lasts. So you look at an institution like Harvard that is 3 centuries old, and you say that the capability of one administration, which is only in power for, say, 4 to 5 years, and possibly more than that if it is 2 terms, to be able to cut funding on, for example, HIV and AIDS, on vaccines, on tuberculosis, on new advances in medicine, new advances in critical thought, in law, um, that the possibility of the damage with the withdrawal of funding um, to now suddenly bring back diseases like smallpox, to bring back diseases Have people die of diseases that advances in medicine have been able to cure. It can set back countries. It can set back progress in research by decades and maybe even centuries. Because I mean, smallpox is one example. It's a century old, tuberculosis, and advances were made that actually enabled it to be completely obliterated in a place like the United States. It's now come back in large, large numbers. And then we look at countries around the world that have been funded by the global outlook of institutions like Harvard, and there are others around the world as well. Um, to cut funding to research programs that necessarily had to happen around the world because that is where the conditions existed for it to breed. So you take something or to continue. Poor countries, for example, that's the only place where this kind of research can happen because that's where the conditions exist for it to be perpetuated, malaria, etc. So for funding to be cut globally is not just something that affects one country in the world, like the USA. It actually affects the world because you look at COVID, for example. It might have originated in one place of the world, but the research on it happened all over the world. And without the funding and the vaccines, for example, going everywhere around the world, the continuation of pandemics, for example, are so much more likely. So it has a global effect as well as an effect within a country. Um, so that's good on the research end, but in terms of the thought leadership, the progressive thought leadership that is needed for us to start thinking about the world, the planet, the globe as being interrelated, as being something that depends, interdependent on each other. Um, that kind of thinking also severely damages the need and the progress that has been made to thinking about globalization in its most positive sense, in its sense of saving the planet and so on for the good of the future generations. And I think that's where it can do damage and is currently, I think, doing damage and has the potential to actually be very, very destructive.
So you are effectively saying that Harvard is playing a large role internationally in research, in developing new programs, being part of societies and delivering services there and helping to go forward. Is that true?
Absolutely. Thank you, Freek, for summarizing my long explanation of all of that. You've summarized it beautifully. So Harvard and institutions like Harvard are certainly doing that.
Now let's come to South Africa. Do you feel that we in South Africa here have the same kind of approaches and values in line with other universities such as Harvard?
I think we do. I think because of the imperatives for transformation in South Africa, South African universities are constantly seeking to improve in delivering their missions of learning and teaching, research, community engagement. I think that they have benefited from having international graduates, both South African graduates who have gone to study in places like Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, universities in the US, but also universities elsewhere, because we bring back a lot of that knowledge. I know that was an imperative for me. I never ever wanted to stay in America. I went there because I thought, what can I bring back into the educational arena that would help us advance? So I think South African universities have benefited in that way, but I think there's also an internal imperative in South African universities to improve because we have to redress some of the ways in which the country as a whole could develop as a result of colonization, as a result of apartheid, and so on. So there's a real imperative. And I think in that sense, the state has made some concerted efforts to ensure that and to direct that we have, that we improve and that we try to do the kinds of things that globally and locally will make a difference in our country. So I think those efforts are underway. We haven't reached the standards because we don't have the money, we don't have the funding, we don't have the resources of a 3-century-old institution and the alumni who contribute. But I think we are making advances in that regard.
The trend internationally seems to be that there should be greater interaction between universities and societies. Do you view it that way?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think in South Africa, um, I think we're very clear about this in South Africa. For most universities, you read their mission statements, and also if you look at their practice, their vision, mission statements, but also their practices and their values. I don't think there's a single university in South Africa that will not describe itself as existing for the public good. And what that means is that we constantly have to take into account how we contribute to the universities being able to play their role in society, in improving society and making a contribution there, and also being held to account in terms of the progress that our country and the societies and communities make. Our students are I would say almost at the forefront of demanding that of us because they're very dissatisfied with the progress being made as students are, hulle is ons baie vooropie waar. Our students are often in the vanguard because they don't hold the same responsibilities of asking for a better society. So our students, but also our leadership. I think our leadership in South African universities are very, very conscious of the need to contribute to society and making it a place for the public good. So, yes, I think that South African universities and also universities around the globe, to various extents, recognize its importance in contributing to making the world a better place
What are
to
you
different degrees.
what are you doing at the moment there at the Nelson Mandela University?
Oh, lots, Freek. So I think currently, and I mean, I don't want to single out Nelson Mandela University because I do think that other universities are doing the same. But at Nelson Mandela University, under our current Vice Chancellor, but also under our previous Vice Chancellor, they are radical leaders. We believe in radical transformation, and by that I mean going right down to the roots of what is what should be there in order to establish the connection between the university and the communities that our students and our staff and our population come from. And so our current university, for example, believes in community engagement for the public good. We talk about hubs of convergence. We're saying that between the university and the communities, there should be a connection, an interaction that looks at what are the needs of that community, what are their hopes and their dreams, and how do we ensure that our programs, our curricula, our engagement activities make the connection between what our society wants, is looking toward, and how our staff and students and our curricula help to develop that. And so there are actual programs that definitely put that into practice. And I can name some of them, but only if there's time for me to do so.
Unfortunately not. Thank you very much for your
Not fortunately
contribution
not.
and good luck.
Oh, thank you, Fred. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very excited to have been part of this.